Hi everyone. In this video we will be unpacking question 13, a short response theory question from the 2023 external exam for economics in Queensland. Questions are starting to get a bit spicier than the first two short response questions. It's now worth 8 marks. Expected length on this one is probably around 150 words. Okay, they gave you 18 lines to write your response, so about 150 words seems to fit to that. Assume that the economy is at point A on the economic cycle and the government is considering a fiscal policy response. So immediately we go, okay, here we are at point A. Is at what phase of our economy are we in? We're in an expansionary phase of the economy. We're above our long run sort of structural rate of economic growth. Okay, so we're above that. That's exciting to think about. We could start to say, well, when an economy is expanding, what's happening to the unemployment rate? What's happening to inflation? What's happening to GDP? Just think about big three indicators. What's happening at each point here? We'll talk about that in more detail later on. The question then is a two-part question. Part one, explain what is happening with income tax receipts at point A. And part two, whether income tax should be reduced. So when the economy's running in an expansionary phase, should we be reducing income tax? Okay, so what's happening with income tax receipts and should we be changing the tax rates at this point? We start to see there are two parts to this question, and when we get to the marking guide, we'll see how those parts all fit together. So once again, let's have a think through a bit of a structure we can use for these questions. Step one, know your question, identify our cognitive verbs. In this case, we'll put an explain, and I'm actually going to add an extra one there. You're going to have to evaluate something. Should they reduce income tax? The topic we're really looking at here, I guess, is it's a fiscal policy question. Fiscal policy. And the target is around income tax and should it be reduced? That's what we're thinking about. So step two, we've got to start to know our theory here. And let's think about what theory would we want to know about. We'd want to really be clear on our business or economic cycle theory. The 4 phases of the business cycle. Once again, we'd want to be thinking about probably our aggregate demand formula. When the economy is expanding, what are we seeing changes occur in our aggregate demand formula? And also, we'd probably want to be thinking about our fiscal policy, I'm going to use FP to shorten that there, in terms of the automatic nature of fiscal policy, as well as the discretionary nature of fiscal policy. As the economy cycles through its 4 phases, we do always see that there's automatic changes in fiscal policy, settings, but at different times governments will make decisions around things like, here, the discretionary one here is, should we reduce income tax? That's our big thing we've got to think about for this question. Okay, so once again, these resources are all linked below. Make sure you've got the question there in front of you and have a think about it as we work through it. All right, let's break down part one. Explain what is happening with income tax receipts at point A. I've built here a little sort of graphic. Take a pause and have a read through this yourself. But let's think about explaining the cognitive verb as we use it for this question in the format of what is going on, why is it happening, and how will this affect the economy? What, why, and how I've used for this one here. Once again, those simple elements there, the explain cognitive verb, really help me to unpack this whole part of the question. At point A, income tax receipts to the government is increasing. So I'm really going to think about what's happening with income tax receipts. At point A, they're rising. And so then I need to say, well, why are they rising? That's clear. That's something that anyone would say that is correct. You can't argue with that. Income tax receipts are rising. Why? The economy is in an expansionary phase, and as I mentioned before, operating above the long-run growth trend. Part two here, as the economy expands, the unemployment rate decreases. So we're seeing more people in jobs. Workers can demand increased wages, so they pay additional income tax to the government. Okay, and this comes back to the idea of, We look at when there's less workers available, the wages that each worker will demand will increase. We've got unemployment rate decreasing, so therefore we have an increase in income and therefore an increase in consumption for our consumers, don't we? They're getting more money, there's more consumption generally in the economy. Once again, we can think about our AD equals C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Circular flow. Now the question I want you to think about here at the end here, guys, is number 4. What's happening with inflation when we're in an expansionary phase of the economy? What's happening with inflation? Okay, unemployment rate is decreasing. We know that there's a Phillips curve relationship, and so therefore inflation is likely rising. Now, inflation will have naturally a contractionary effect on the economy. Okay, and we can look at the inflation here from 2 different aspects. We can look at the inflation from the increase in consumption. That's the demand side. And we can also look at the inflation from the increase in wages, which is a supply side. Sorry, the colours are a bit hard to read on that one there. There's 2 supply side effects that are working to increase inflation. People have more money to spend, but the increased demand is going to push up prices, but also when people start insisting on higher wages, and we've been seeing recently in Australia in 2024, we've been seeing wage rises occur across industry sectors. We start to see that then influences the cost of producing a good or service. Okay, so now we can start to see that income tax receipts are increasing. More people working and also more people earning higher money, so there's more tax being paid to the government. So we then have to look at part 3 here. How will it affect the economy? Higher incomes are going to equal higher consumption. And more people working and a drop in unemployment tends to lead to higher consumption also. When you go from being on a low wage or a low wage like a job seeker payment to getting an income job, you tend to increase your consumption because of the variance in the values. However, the proportional increase in income tax will mean that consumption will rise, but it's going to rise at a decreasing rate. I apologise for the spelling mistake there. It's going to rise at a decreasing rate, okay? All that additional income will actually incur, proportionally, you're going to be paying more tax as well. And that is going to have a dampening effect. That's going to dampen consumption somewhat, okay? This is the automatic stabiliser effect we talk about. There's still going to be an increase in consumption, but it's going to start to slow down. And this will smooth the business cycle. So in effect, we'll still see growth, but at some point we'll start to see it head into increasing at a slower rate, and then at some point it will flick the other way and continue to go through its cycle from there. So once again, the first part of the question, what is going on, why is it happening, and how will it affect the economy? That's your explain. If you follow through those steps, you're probably going to hit all the parts of the marking guide. What, why, and how will it affect the economy? The second part of the question ponders whether income tax should be reduced. You have to make a decision. You have to evaluate something. You have to come to a position. And whenever we evaluate, you come to the decision and you must justify it. We're starting to think here about discretionary fiscal policy. Okay, so these are as you might have learned in your course, these are the actual changes that the government may set to change levels of taxation and government expenditure that work through a clear action of the government. So, for example, the tax rate, you may seek to drop the tax rate to give people more money in their back pocket. What we know so far, though, is we know that in this question, the automatic effect of it is having a contractionary effect. Okay, I'm just going to use a down position here. Okay, And that's going to occur through a few ways. First thing, the tax increase is leading to the contractionary effect. So there's going to be the proportionally higher amount of tax paid. It adds to the contraction. Secondly, there's inflation at work. And inflation tends to, as prices rise to a particular tolerance, inflation tends to lead to a decrease in consumption at some point in the future. So the tax rising is going to lead at some point to some decrease in consumption, and inflation rising is going to lead to a decrease in consumption. So the automatic stabilisers tend to work quite well at this point. The question here is, in discretionary fiscal policy, if we reduce income tax rates, if we reduce tax rates, what would be effect on the business cycle? As I'm writing this down, have a think through it. What would be the effect on the business cycle if we dropped the tax rates? Okay, if we drop tax rates, we put more money in people's pockets. Let's go back to AD. AD would see an increase in consumption. Okay, not sure what it would do for investment, not sure what it would do for government spending, not sure what it would do for exports and imports. Well, maybe we'd actually probably see imports rise as well. People buying more stuff, that flows back over to consumption over here. Okay, but what we're really thinking about here is that all this is leading to this increase in consumption. Now, with an economy which is working pretty hot and is already seeing inflationary pressure, do you want to put more inflationary pressure? Because, you know, if I have an extra dollar in my pocket, I'm probably going to spend it. Pressure into an expanding economy. And look, the answer is probably not, because then the Reserve Bank's going to have to turn around and raise interest rates and do all that sort of stuff. But we're not going to worry about that for now. We're just saying we don't want to do it because we've already got inflationary pressure. We're already working above our structural or long run growth targets here, or growth trajectory here. So we're seeing a pretty hot economy to start with. So whether we should reduce income tax, and I hope that by now you come to the answer, no, we shouldn't be reducing income tax. The reduction in income tax would actually be expansionary, whereas the automatic stabilisers are contractionary. We'd want our discretionary and automatic stabiliser policy to line up pretty well. Okay, so we want to have auto is contractionary, and we'd want to have discretionary also being contractionary or unchanged. Okay, just leave it as it is. Leave your tax settings as they are. Probably you'll find that automatically the economy at some point, inflation gets hot enough, tax levels increase high enough that the economy will start to turn back towards a peak and then back into a contractionary phase of its own accord at some point. Okay, let's check the marking guide. Okay, so there's an example there. You read through the sample response. You'll see here that the response has two key areas to explore: the automatic stabiliser and discretionary spending. Once again, know your theory. If you only talk about the automatic stabiliser effect of fiscal policy, you're only going to get at the most 4 out of 8. So you've really got to break down the two parts of that question. There's a part one, which is this part, and this is the second part. This is the whether and the should. Okay, describes the economy as overheating and inflationary pressures existing. Well, we hit on inflation. I don't like overheating as a term. I think that's a poor use of economic jargon for a response in an exam, but we'll just park it there and leave it to people who think they can write the questions. Describes that automatic stabilisers are working at the peak of the cycle to slow economic activity. Well, I think we've broken that down pretty well. More income taxes paid as incomes are higher at the peak of the cycle. Yeah, they generally are. You know, the ratchet effect of this anyway means that we don't tend to see wages for individual jobs drop. We just see higher unemployment rates. Explains stabilising reasoning using the circular flow model. Okay, so once again, I focused on the AD equals C plus I plus G plus x minus m at that point. And I think that's probably a pretty good way to think about it. It actually says that there, slowing aggregate demand in the economy. That's the link there. Okay, discretionary spending identifies that a fall in income tax is the incorrect fiscal response. Make a decision. Explain what would happen if you did that. Okay, so if we went down this path, what would happen? Income tax would stimulate the economy at a time it should be contracting. I think we broke that down pretty well. Identifies that a drop in income tax would conflict with the automatic stabiliser. We definitely discussed that. And uses rising inflation to support the appropriate fiscal response. Okay, once again, thinking back to inflation, always think back in your questions to those big macro indicators. Inflation, how does it link to unemployment? And ultimately, what is the effect on GDP? Once again, we can always think back to how will they affect our big indicators just here. The critical part of this question is to read the question carefully and ensure that you very, very explicitly break down both part A, or both the first part of the question, explain what is happening with income tax receipts, and the second part being whether income tax should be reduced. So be very, very clear when you break down those questions. Critical to cover all those aspects. Okay, I hope this video was helpful. There's more coming on the final questions of the exam, and good luck with your ongoing preparation. Okay, cheers folks.